So, in my last story, I mentioned something regarding how the nature of a man is not so much what he is as much as what he does. I also mentioned that therein lay another story I'd tell you all at some point. This is that point. Some years ago, while attending a university, I took a lecture-style music history course. I was a little nervous about it because, at the time, I had a very high grade point average, and I have, in the past, not been so good at passing courses which had non-interactive style content. But it was part of the degree program in which I was involved, so it was more or less a required course I needed to complete at some point. Now, before I get into that, let me turn back time a few decades and give you some background. In all the schooling in which I had ever been involved, I had never taken notes. I had instead always preferred to listen intently to the lecture and think about what I was hearing. Now, maybe that was laziness, or just a desire to pay attention to the lecture. I'm not really sure. Doing this, I had never gotten better than a C as a grade in a lecture-style course, and in what I thought of as an unrelated note, years later, I always retained quite a lot about any such course, even though I took no notes. People I know well have always marveled at how much I retained of very difficult material many years later, even if it was information I didn't engage with in my life that often. Now, most people tell me that they don't retain much of their course content after finishing the final exam. I noticed that about people. While I could never get an A on a final, I always seemed to retain what I did learn about the subject for a very long time. To be honest, I never connected the two things. I never thought that they were related. I just thought that perhaps my memory was, if not better than average, perhaps different from other people's ability to retain things. Now let's get back to the music history course. Well, the fact is, I didn't want to get a C or a D in this course. I wanted to retain my high GPA for whatever reason. Perhaps it was a matter of pride. I don't really remember. Here's where the note-taking comes in. So, a few years prior, I had told a good friend who has several advanced degrees and who had been a very good student when she had been in school that I was going back to school, and that I was kind of nervous about it because I had not always been the best, most focused student. I remember at that time that she told me about her awesome fail-safe note-taking technique. Now, even though the technique is not important to the story, I'll share it with you all anyway because it was, well and truly, an awesome technique. My friend explained it this way. Use a spiral notebook and only write on the right-hand page. Write as fast as you can, not worrying about space. Keep turning the pages and writing on the right side. Don't worry if you write too big or sloppy. Just go as fast as you can and keep turning the pages and writing on the right-hand side. Then, after the course is done for the day, sit down somewhere and, on the left-hand pages, number and write the questions that the things on the right are the answers to. Then you've created a study guide. Now you can go over it and even have someone else ask you the questions on the guide. In doing this, she was able to retain the answers to some questions that other students didn't even realize were going to be included on the various tests or the final exam. It sounded like an awesome technique, so it really stuck in my mind. So, when it came time for a real lecture-style course, I was prepared to try out my friend's note-taking technique. Well, long story short, it worked great. And while I didn't get an A in the course, I did get a B+, mostly because my final project was late. I did get A's on the midterm and final exams. Now, here's the point of the whole story. Less than a month later, I realized that I remembered almost nothing from that music history course. Of course, decades later, I still remember very little from that course. It's almost as though I never took it. And it was then that I realized that maybe my lack of taking notes was involved in my long-term retention of information. That maybe the same thing that caused me to get bad grades on tests also helped me remember more in the long term. Thinking about it more in depth, I started to realize that although I didn't remember details of courses during which I didn't take notes, I did integrate the spirit of the course material. I could still explain what the course was all about, and even talk about some specifics, even if I didn't remember all the names and dates involved. Perhaps the distraction of note-taking interfered with my integration of all the material into a unified whole. And perhaps I thought that might be true of anyone, not just me. Perhaps the general rule might be, take notes, get good grades, remember very little later. Don't take notes, get bad grades, remember much more in the long run. Perhaps my brain is not all that unusual. What is unusual is what I generally chose to do. Not take notes, just listen and think. But the main takeaway is that if I do what everyone else does, I get the same results as everyone else has. And I guess that's the story.